Hello and welcome to the ColdCast. I'm your host, Dr. Anna Johnson, and I'm Vice President of Marketing and Commercial Strategies at United States Cold Storage. So today I have very distinguished guests here on the ColdCast. I have the Chairman of US Cold, JB Rae-Smith, and the non-executive independent board director, Dorlisa Flur. So welcome to the ColdCast. So to kick this off, JB, why don't you give us a little bit of background on you?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's kind of fun to speak to everybody about US Cold Storage. I was first a board member of US Cold Storage in, I suppose, 2001. I worked for US Cold Storage from September 1998. Then I was a board director for a couple of years. And then I stepped off the board for about 8 years. And then in 2008, came back on the board, and I've been on the board since then. I actually started work with Swire back in 1985 when US Cold Storage was owned by a business called Trans-Canada Freezers. So I date back quite a lot. So I know a lot about US Cold's Swire history. Of course, US Cold Storage is a business which was founded in around about 1920. And so I don't know very much about so I don't date back that long.
Well, you've been here since the ice ages.
And I suppose a little bit about me. I was born in Japan. I moved back to Scotland, where I am from, when I was 8 years old. And then I eventually went to school in England. And after I graduated from college, I went to Australia and started my career working for the Swire Group in a company called Fridgemobile, which was, in fact, Swire's first entry into the cold storage business. And from Fridgemobile, we ended up buying a share in the business that owned United States Cold Storage.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your contributions to US Cold. Dorlisa, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, a little intimidating to follow him because I'm a relative newbie by comparison. So my name is Dorlisa Flur. As you said, I'm an independent, non-executive director of cold storage, and so I joined the board, I think officially July of 2019, so a little bit over 5 years ago. So I'm a native North Carolinian. I now live in Charlotte. That was not where I was from. I was from a small town, and I spent time in other places in between. But I like to say that service on boards right now is my third career. So my first career for about a decade and a half was as a consultant with McKinsey & Company. And there did a lot of analytics and strategy work and would set in motion major transformation programs. But candidly, clients didn't keep us around because we were too expensive to stay the duration. So my second life was what I call my real jobs. They all happened to be in retail. And I had the opportunity to go in and actually be the operator in the dollar store segment, department store, and grocery. And so as I decided to make the shift into this third phase of board service, I got a call from an executive search firm that was working with US Cold Storage to bring in an independent director. And they happened to be from the supply chain practice, and they called and said, we want to talk to you about this search because we've had a devil of a time finding someone who had a broad perspective about retail and in particular food retailing, but also had their hands dirty enough to be able to get in and talk about what it took to get things done. And so I regaled them a little story about how in the dollar store days I became the cooler queen and rolled out 5-door refrigeration frozen sets to all of our stores, and that somehow convinced them that I had a little bit of dirt under my fingernails, but that I could still talk strategically. So I was delighted to get the chance, interesting enough, to come out. We were filming this in California and have lunch with JB in San Francisco. And then he, and at the time Dave Harlan, invited me to join the board.
Well, we are very happy that you're here. So we're going to kick it off with a question in terms of the priorities for the United States Cold Storage Board in 2025 and beyond. How do you kind of align that with the strategy that we've laid out? And I'll ask that of JB.
The board's responsibility is not really about today. The board's responsibility is about tomorrow. Management is responsible for today. And of course, we do have a responsibility to make sure that the company doesn't go bankrupt, it sort of makes money, and we operate safely and responsibly. So that is an important responsibility, and we take that very, very seriously. But you know, when we're talking about today, when we're addressing this question, I like to think that as a board, we're responsible for making sure that we have a business that is sustainable and flourishing in 5 years' time. I mean, I'm not really going to make a big difference to what's going to happen at the end of this year, but I hope we as a board can make a big difference to what's going to happen in 5 years' time. And so what would I say are today's priorities? I say is, can we think about where should the business be positioned in terms of customers, where the market is going? You know, let's say that frozen food was to become much smaller and cooler business was to become much bigger. Are we investing enough in a pipeline to make sure we can address the future customer needs? Let's say that, you know, we're building a big distribution and a big sort of agricultural support business, and we want to make sure we have facilities in the places where those are going to flourish, as opposed to places where they're not going to flourish. So I think that that's one direction we as a board have a responsibility to make sure we're looking after the future. The next thing, which, you know, has kind of changed a lot in my lifetime, is how we are going to address the whole issue of technology. Well, I suppose since I started work, and when I started work, we had telexes and fax machines, and we shared a PC. Some people knew how to use Lotus. And we didn't even have Microsoft Office, and change was pretty slow. You know, we would even write letters to people to say this is what we would like to do, and you'd wait for a week to get an answer, or maybe wait 2 weeks. You know, there are people we employ now who had no concept of what it means to dial on the telephone. And why do you dial a telephone number? I mean, I know you're too young, of course, but Dorlisa and I know it's dialing like this, right? And so, and what we now, I think, have a much bigger responsibility to do is to understand, to make sure that we have the right tools to ensure that technology doesn't leave us behind.
I guess, Dorlisa, in thinking about a board in terms of responsibilities, so what are your kind of, he's talking about longer term priorities, what are kind of the overarching responsibilities of a board?
I serve on several public company boards, and I have found that the way Swire governs its portfolio companies, including U.S. Cold Storage, is a very mature governance model that compares quite favorably to public company without having some of the administrivia that's put on public companies. We'll build a bit on what JB said and say that I've tended to think of the role of the board, pardon the alliteration, but as being kind of oversight, insight, and foresight. And so this oversight part does tend to be a bit more short-term oriented, where one thing that the board is responsible for is each year approving a budget, then working with Larry and the team to ensure that we are hitting the KPIs and that we are living up to our financial obligations, because long-term, that is going to affect the return on capital. The insight part is a little bit more of what goes on in our boardroom discussions, because that's where, you know, a healthy board, and I think we do have a healthy board dynamic, is one where we bring our knowledge from different areas and we're able to challenge the management team about whether we are making some of those right decisions about where we're choosing to invest, how we're changing the organization so that the right people are being put into the succession path for Larry, his direct reports, go on further down. You know, the foresight piece is a bit the hardest, because that's a little bit like, sounds like the crystal ball. We don't have a crystal ball, no one does. But I think as we, and you are a big part of our strategy days that we have every year or two, that's the board's opportunity with management to kind of step back and say, where is this world going? And how could we see the structure of our industry changing? You know, is our business model going to remain healthy as we look out in the future? And so I think that's what we're trying to bring in, a little bit more top-down perspective. We are not, as I sometimes say, we're not encumbered by quite as many facts. And so that may help us be a bit more blue sky in some of our questions.
Yeah, and you guys rely on us to provide that context, and then you kind of give some guidance. So you were talking a little bit about insight, And I'm just curious, how do you guys think about the relationship between the boards and our leaders? Because you mentioned Larry, who's our CEO. So how do you guys think about those interactions and kind of your relationship, and has it evolved over time?
An expression that gets used a lot in U.S. Boards in general is this notion of noses in, fingers out. And so that we as a board, we do need to look and try to ensure that the right things are going on, that we feel comfortable, that we're asking the right questions. But ultimately, we're not the operators. And so we are going to typically defer to management if they're saying, it just needs to happen this way, or I need to get this person in this role to get it done. I think we, in turn, really ask that there's no surprises. And so I feel like we don't have surprises. Maybe the only time I felt like I got a surprise was when we did some kind of a security drill. And like I said, even if I knew it was going to happen, it still kind of made my heart thump a little harder when I got those emails. We all need to be and are on the same page strategically, be that kind of mutual respect so that we can have constructive debate and decision making.
What's the role of the board in terms of dealing with the management? And the first, I think the chairman's role is different from the directors insofar as you have to acknowledge the CEO's position is a lonely position. The CEO's in charge and he's got to make some tough decisions. And although he may be friendly with people, he has to be detached from his friendship to take the right decision for the business. And an important position for the chairman is to be the person who the CEO can talk openly to without judgment. In England, we would say a shoulder to cry on, because it's lonely at the top, right? If you're the CEO, you can't go and cry on some employees' shoulders because maybe business isn't going well and they're not feeling very sympathetic towards you. So I think one role for the chairman is you have to be the shoulder to cry on, have to be the empathetic person who can listen to the chairman. For the rest of the board, just a general director position, we need to acknowledge that if we want a sustainable business in 5 years' time, it relies on having good senior leadership. And so we need to at least know the senior leadership and have confidence that they can execute. And then have the confidence and the relationship with the chairman to say, you have the right team to deliver, or we're not quite confident that you have the right team to deliver and you've got to make some adjustments.
So if you think about just in general, some of our listeners, like what advice do you have for any executives out there in dealing with a board?
The board's role, and that it is different than management. And so tailor how you interact with us, tailor, we're your audience. What that typically means is less is more when you get into presentation kind of context with us. Because we can easily get lost in some of the detail that is just part of your everyday lives, and so you don't have to think about it. Even acronyms. Synthesize us what the key issues are that you're struggling with. If you've got options, kind of lay out the options, and then I know I far prefer to engage in a two-way dialogue rather than having someone present to me. So be prepared to have that two-way dialogue. And that's maybe a little bit more of a formal boardroom setting. The senior management meeting that we're at right now also affords us the opportunity to interact with each other at dinner, sitting in a meeting room, break time between, and then we've had other situations when we go out to facilities and we get to meet people in all of the roles. We're human beings just like you are, and we're interested in getting to know you. So tell us about your background and your family and what excites you about cold storage.
Everybody on the board wants US Cold to do well. I imagine most employees in US Cold want US Cold to do well. So how can you use your relationship with the board to make US Cold better? And lots of board members have different experiences and different knowledges, and how can you unlock that for the benefit of the business? What skills and what experiences do those board members have that might be valuable for me? I think the other thing that is important to bear in mind is that, or I feel strongly, is there is a chain of command. We have confidence in the management and we have confidence in the chain of command, and it doesn't work if you want to try and sneak up to a board member and say, blah, blah, blah. That's not how it works. And I don't think it's healthy for a company for that to happen. And it's certainly not healthy for me to encourage that.
Good perspective. What role do customer relationships play in the overall growth strategy of the company? And then how do you make sure that those relationships remain central to the board?
Well, I think customer is the focal point of strategy, and that the organizations that win over the long haul are those that do an excellent job serving their customers, and then the financial rewards come from that. The companies that I've seen get in trouble have been those that focus on the financials and then solve for what service model they can afford. When I look at US Cold Storage, I'm excited about how over my tenure on the board, a little over 5 years, we've really developed a sharper understanding of who is our kind of sweet spot customer. So I remember one of the first strategy days that you and I had the opportunity to work on together, there was kind of questions around, are we targeting companies with distribution businesses, more in the agricultural? Are there certain industries, this was during COVID, is food service or grocery going to be a higher opportunity point for us long term? And I think as we have really looked at it, what we want to do is serve those customers where US Cold Storage can uniquely bring something to them that our competitors are not able to just emulate automatically. And I think we've developed some words around this notion of having a more purposeful partnership. So looking for those customers that really are in it for the long haul with us. And I remember a debate we had at one of our strategy days around what is customer relationship, kind of we golf together, backslapping, and we said no, it's really more about this joint problem solving. Our customer has a need, and US Cold Storage, with many of the different areas of the company, kind of swarm that need and think about how do we come up with a solution, and a solution that really delivers value to that customer. And I think inherent in this long-term partnership is the fact that we prefer to work with those who understand we're going to need to get a fair return over time. And so I think if we look at some of the relationships that sometimes we have de-emphasized as they've maybe gone through a change in ownership to more of a transactional private equity ownership, and all they wanted was to get cheap capacity, that's not really the sweet spot for cold storage. That's we can serve them if we've got extra capacity, but I think our sweet spot is really focusing on these customers that value that kind of purposeful partnership. So we as the board only get little bits and pieces of opportunity to interact with some of the real customers, sometimes at some of our board meetings or strategy days, at the economics of our relationship. When we're presented, particularly with a board paper about a new, $100 million plus investment in a new facility, we critically evaluate the strength of those customer relationships and make sure that we feel good that that partnership is there to warrant us making that joint investment in the future.
How does the board view the current landscape in cold storage?
We have to understand we are effectively 1/5 the size of our two biggest competitors. How can we do our job better than them to make sure their advantages of being 5 times our size, that we can offset their advantages of the being 5 times our size with us being maybe a smaller and more nimble competitor, that private equity believes cold storage is a great space to be. Now, we have the advantage over our smaller competitors of being much bigger than them, so we can invest in more. Our bigger competitors have over us, we have over them. Our position really must be just to observe what they do, make sure we continue doing what we're doing as well as possible. That includes looking after our customers. And if we do those things right, it'll be good for us.
You talked about the investment that private equity is making in the market. It seems like a lot of private equity companies are coming in. So how do you view the long-term value of this investment? How has the strategy evolved in recent years?
When US Cold Storage was small, we invested a small amount of money. When it's big, we've invested a bigger amount of money. But relatively, have we changed the size of investment? Probably not significantly. We believe as Swire that food is a great place to be. People in America will continue to eat food, and cold storage is a vital part of the food supply chain. And as the US population continues to grow, we want to support that part of the infrastructure.
Typically we grow through expansions and new builds. So how do you guys think about acquisitions versus new builds, and kind of what are your thoughts around kind of that perspective?
We have a great culture. We have great employees. If we buy another business, we buy something which we don't know is a great culture. We don't know if they're great employees, and we don't know if they're great facilities. I personally would prefer to invest $100 million in a new facility of US Cold, brand new technology, but built by US Cold's finest, operated by people we've trained, than buy something for ultimately less value, and then try to integrate new systems, try to integrate new people. Yes, we've done it in the past, and sometimes it's been successful and sometimes it hasn't.
Yeah, so both of you kind of bring unique perspectives to the board. How do we think about the board makeup when you decide who's going to be on the board and the role they're going to play? How do you think about that?
If everybody's good at engineering, then we're not going to get anywhere. You need people who understand human resources, you need people who understand a bit about engineering, you need people who understand customers. So what you've got to do essentially is just to make sure you haven't stacked the board with everybody who's the same. When one's reflecting on who should be part of the board, you might find two great people, but if they both have the same skills, then we don't want both. We can only afford to have one.
So what excites you about US Cold?
The fantastic camaraderie. That everybody you meet in US Cold has a can-do attitude, and I don't think I've ever met anybody in US Cold Storage who does not want the company to do well. And I think that's special. And if you work with people who want to work with who want to make the company better, the best, then what more can you want?
So, Dorlisa, I know you serve on multiple boards and you're part of the National Association of Corporate Directors. So what are some things that you guys are thinking about that US Cold needs to be aware of, or some of our ColdCast participants need to be aware of?
What we're talking about in my other boards is not only the cyber expertise or the cyber threat, but how do we broadly as a board play a role in governing technology? Because technology used to at best be a support, and now in many cases it's becoming a major thrust of the strategy going forward, and how do you integrate it in the right way? So we're talking about it, cyber often as the risk, but technology, maybe the bigger risk is if we don't seize it and use it in the right way.
Swire really wants us to think about, with all this change, do we still have a business in 10 years' time, 20 years' time? We invest for a long time. We build spend $100 million on Lowell. We're not building it for 2027. We're building it for 2045. And we better make sure that we have a platform that will still be doing a great job in 2045. And that's a lot more difficult today than it was in 1990.
So I know that Swire has a very strong focus on sustainability. So tell me a little bit how you think about sustainability and how that translates into what you guys are doing in the board.
Let's go back to 2000 when we first started thinking about energy efficiency. And energy efficiency then was about saving money. And I think in the environment, sensible use of the environment is great business. It sort of saves money, right? We have solar panels, so then we have our own electricity. It saves us money. It's the right way to go. And then we need to reflect on the fact is that we live in a planet with dwindling resources, and how do we husband those for future generations? Swire, we have committed to using 100% renewable energy, electric energy by 2030. We have started this process about sending all the food not to landfills. It's a combination of using resources more sensibly so they make us a better business, and using resources more sensibly so we use less of them, so there's still those resources for future generations to use them.
And I'll add that I've really been excited about what Flur is doing in sustainability because it feels like it's rooted in the long-term focus of the company, and it's rooted in doing the right thing for the communities we're in, for the world at large. If I contrast it with what I've seen on some of the public boards, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, released rules last year. And so all the public companies were so much more focused on what do I need to be able to track? What do I have to report? How do I have to prove it? And so it was much more of a compliance mentality. By contrast, what I see is Larry and the team come in and there's a sustainability strategy and it's multi-year and it makes a lot of sense. It goes from everything from how we invest in and run solar to how we think about using some financial instruments. But you get a very smart all-around strategy, and there's, like any other strategy, there's a timeline, there's metrics for how we look at it. But I come away feeling very good that this is being done for the right reasons.
When we started on our sustainability journey, we were already looking at those things and already had some of those things in place. So it was a very easy jumping off point from a mindset perspective for us to be able to say, okay, well, what else can we do and how else can we apply these things? Thinking about the future, what does a day in the life of someone at United States Cold Storage look at in 2045?
Going down the future, automation will be a much bigger part of our life, and we've got to learn to use it sensibly to make sure that automation provides opportunities for our employees to grow and get better jobs in the process as we're growing through that whole change. And that we don't leave the people on the warehouse floor behind and they go with us, and those that want to grow into better positions with increasing automation.
Well, and I'll add on to this that one of the books I've read that is about AI, but I think it applies broadly, is called Co-Intelligence. And the author, a guy from Wharton named Ethan Mollick, makes the point that it's not going to be a matter of machines or people. It's going to be the right combination of those. But that what happens is over time we kind of got this jagged frontier. And so the right blend of the two is moving for different roles. And so I think it's exciting when you think about that some of the roles that may not be as inspiring to work in long term, well, how do we find a way to turn those over to the automation? But in so doing, how do we actually enrich the roles of those who are the human beings that are the co-intelligence in our business model?
And still make sure that we have this passion to feed America, and that plays over in our employees every day.
Yes.
So JB, I wanted to ask you, what does the future of US Cold look like?
The future, we're going to see a lot more automation, and we should embrace that, and we should be bringing our staff along with it. We should be ensuring that as we automate in areas, we make people's life easier, and we make those who are involved in the specific areas where automation is impacting them, that their jobs evolve and become better, and the more painful aspects of their day are removed, so we get more of the thinking, the more of the bits they like doing in their life, and automation is doing more of the stuff that nobody really likes doing.
Well, thank you, JB and Dorlisa, for joining us today, and thank you guys for watching the ColdCast. I think we had a great conversation. We learned a lot about how a board thinks about a company. We learned a little bit about our industry, and again, how the board thinks about our industry, technology, what keeps you up at night, what kind of challenges we're dealing with, and where we see opportunity. So thank you guys very much, and thank you guys at home, and stay cool.